Before I married him, my life was not dramatic. It was structured, predictable, quiet. I worked as a financial compliance officer in a mid-sized firm. My days were filled with documents, policy reviews, and measured conversations. I liked work that had clear rules. If something was wrong, it could be traced, corrected, documented. Outside of work, my world was small. A few friends from university, weekly dinners with my older sister. Occasional family gatherings that felt more obligatory than joyful. I was not lonely, but I was careful. After a relationship in my 20s that ended in quiet betrayal, I had learned to value steadiness over intensity. Love, to me, no longer meant fireworks. It meant reliability. I met him through extended family. Not a formal arrangement, but close enough. My aunt mentioned that he had recently moved back to the city for work. Stable job. Calm personality. Never married. Very respectful, she said. Our first conversation was simple. He asked about my work. He listened without interrupting. He did not try to impress me. He did not overshare. When I paused, he waited instead of filling the silence. That restraint felt mature. We met a few more times in public places. Cafes. A quiet park near my office. He remembered small details from previous conversations, that I preferred green tea without sugar, that I disliked loud restaurants, that I once considered studying abroad but stayed for family. I assumed my aunt had mentioned these things. He never flirted aggressively. He never pushed for quick decisions. When my sister asked what I thought of him, I said, he feels safe. And I meant it. There was something grounded about him. He spoke about long-term plans in practical terms, savings, stability, routine. He did not romanticize marriage. He described it as partnership, responsibility, shared structure. It aligned with the version of life I had slowly built for myself. When he proposed, it was not extravagant, just a small dinner with family present. He looked composed, certain. I think we would be good for each other, he said. Not I can't live without you. Not you're my destiny. Just steady logic. I respected that. In the weeks before the wedding, I noticed how prepared he seemed. Documents arranged. Guest list finalized. Vendor payments confirmed. He handled logistics without complaint. At the time, I saw competence. I did not see calculation. On our wedding day, he stood at the altar with the same calm expression he always wore. When our eyes met, he smiled softly, as if something long awaited had finally settled. I thought that look meant relief. I believed we were stepping into something new together. I did not consider that for him. This was not a beginning. It was the conclusion of something I had never known existed. The first few weeks of marriage were quiet. Not joyful in a loud way, not difficult either, just structured. We settled into routines quickly. He left for work at 8. I left at 8:30. We ate dinner together most nights. He preferred home-cooked meals. I did not mind. Nothing felt wrong. But small moments began to press against the edges of my comfort. One evening, I mentioned a childhood memory about getting lost at a seaside market when I was 9. I had never told him that story before. It was not something I shared often. He smiled faintly. You cried near a fruit stall, he said. Your father carried you the rest of the way. I stared at him. Yes, I said slowly. How did you know that? He did not hesitate. Your cousin mentioned it once. We were talking about childhood stories. It sounded reasonable. Still, I could not remember my cousin ever telling that story in detail. I let it go. Another time, we passed a bookstore downtown. I glanced at the window display but kept walking. You used to come here during university, he said casually. I stopped. I did. You mentioned it. You liked the back corner near the philosophy section. I searched my memory. I did love that corner, but I did not remember telling him that specifically. Maybe I had, during one of our long early conversations. Memory is fragile. I told myself that. He began anticipating my moods before I expressed them. On a day when work had been particularly draining, he had already ordered my favorite takeout before I arrived home. I could tell from your messages, he said, but my messages had been brief, neutral. At night, I noticed he sometimes watched me when he thought I was asleep, not in a threatening way, just studying. When I opened my eyes once, he smiled softly. I still can't believe you're here, he whispered. It sounded romantic, yet something about the tone felt less surprised and more confirmed. A week later, while organizing a storage cabinet, I found an old photo album tucked behind winter blankets. It was not ours. The cover was worn. Inside were pictures from community events years ago, festivals, charity drives, public gatherings. In several photos, I was there, younger, standing with friends, unaware of the camera. He appeared in some of them too, not beside me, just present, in the background, across the room. I carried the album to him. Oh, those, he said easily. Old community events. I kept them for memories. You never mentioned we attended the same ones, I said. He shrugged lightly. It was a small world. A small world. That explanation should have satisfied me. Instead, I felt something quiet shift inside my chest. Not fear, just a thin line of awareness forming. Still, I told myself that coincidences happen. Cities overlap. Lives cross without meaning. Marriage requires trust. And at that point, I was still trying to protect the version of him I believed I had chosen. He noted the cafe I visited every Thursday between classes. He described the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I read. He wrote about the day it rained unexpectedly and I stood under the library steps waiting for it to slow. I had forgotten that day. He had not. The entries were not daily. They were selective, as if he only wrote when something about me felt significant to him. One entry stopped me completely. She looked tired today, sat alone longer than usual. I wanted to speak to her. I didn't, not yet. Not yet. I closed the notebook and felt the room change around me. This was not admiration from a distance. This was proximity without introduction. The entries continued for almost a year. Then they became less frequent. Then they stopped entirely the same month I moved to another city for work. There were no pages after that, as if the story had paused. When I asked him about the notebook, I did not raise my voice. I placed it on the table between us and waited. He looked at it for a long moment before speaking. I wondered when you would find that, he said quietly. There was no panic in his expression, no embarrassment, just calm acknowledgement. You were writing about me, I said. Yes. For how long? A while. A year, he nodded. You never spoke to me. I didn't think you would notice me then. The answer felt rehearsed, as if he had already accepted this confrontation in his mind long ago. You followed my routines, I said carefully. I observed, he corrected gently. There's a difference. I held his gaze. Why didn't you tell me before we got married? He smiled faintly. Because it would have sounded strange, and it was harmless. I never interfered with your life. Harmless, the word echoed in my mind. You wrote about my private moments, I said. I admired you, he replied. From a distance, that's all it was. His voice carried no aggression, no apology either, just certainty. I realized then that he did not see anything wrong with what he had done, and that frightened me more than the notebook itself. The red flags were no longer subtle. They were written in ink, and I was beginning to understand that our marriage had not begun when I thought it did. For him, it had started 15 years earlier. After the notebook, I expected tension. Instead, he became gentler, attentive in a way that felt deliberate. He made tea before I asked. He lowered his voice when speaking. He watched me carefully as if monitoring damage control. You've been quiet, he said one evening. I'm thinking, I replied, about something that happened 15 years ago. His tone was light, almost amused. It matters, I said. He leaned back in his chair. You're giving it weight it doesn't deserve. I studied his face. There was no anger there, only patience. You wrote about me like I was a project, I said slowly. I wrote because I admired you, he corrected. People write poems about strangers all the time. You weren't a stranger, you were watching me. I never touched you, never approached you, never interfered. He listed these facts like legal defenses. You hid it from me, I said, because I knew you would react like this. The conversation shifted subtly. I could feel it. He was no longer explaining himself. He was evaluating me. You're intelligent, he continued. You know I never harmed you. Harm isn't always physical. He sighed softly as if I had disappointed him. You think too deeply about things that are simple. Simple. 15 years of silent observation reduced to simplicity. The next weekend, during a family dinner, he mentioned casually that he had always liked me even back in the day. My aunt smiled warmly. That's romantic, she said. So patient. I felt my stomach tighten. The narrative had already been softened. When I tried to explain that it was more than a simple crush, my sister frowned. He waited for you, isn't that a good thing? I realized then how easily devotion could be repackaged. At home, I told him it made me uncomfortable that he had shared a partial version of the story. I didn't lie, he said calmly. I just didn't dramatize it the way you do. I'm not dramatizing. You're reacting emotionally. There it was, the quiet dismissal, the suggestion that my discomfort was instability. Over the next few days, he became subtly corrective. If I seemed distant, he would say, You're overthinking again. If I hesitated before answering him, he would smile faintly and say, Still stuck on the notebook. He never raised his voice. He never threatened. He simply reduced my concerns until they sounded unreasonable. I began doubting my own instincts. Maybe I was projecting past relationship trauma. Maybe I was searching for flaws because stability felt unfamiliar. One night, as I lay awake, I felt the weight of something heavier than suspicion. I felt small, not controlled in obvious ways, but repositioned, as if my reaction to his 15-year silence was the real problem, and he was the reasonable one. That realization unsettled me more than the notebook ever had, because control delivered calmly is harder to recognize. I did not confront him again immediately. Instead, I called someone who existed in that earlier version of my life. Miriam had been my closest friend during university. We had drifted after I moved cities, but not because of conflict, just distance. I asked if we could speak privately. When I mentioned his name, there was a pause. "Oh," she said, "him." The way she said it made my chest tighten. "You remember him?" I asked. "Yes, I thought you did. I didn't know him." She hesitated. "He used to be around, not constantly, but enough." "In what way?" "He asked about you, a few times, casual questions. Your major, your schedule, I assumed you were already talking." I swallowed. "We were," she exhaled softly. "There was one time he waited outside the economics lecture hall. I thought he was meeting someone, but when you came out, he just watched for a second and then walked away." The image landed heavily. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. It didn't seem threatening. He wasn't aggressive, just present. Present, that word again. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Later that week, I reopened the notebook. This time, I checked the dates against specific events I remembered. The day I failed a statistics exam. The afternoon I had an argument with Miriam outside the library. The graduation rehearsal he described. None of those moments had been public announcements. They were ordinary, private experiences, yet he had documented them with precision. There was another entry I had missed before. "Spoke to A today. She mentioned her cousin's wedding next month. I will attend." A, my aunt. The same aunt who later reintroduced us years later. I felt something settle into place. This had not been random reconnection. He had maintained distant ties intentionally, not obsessively, not dramatically. Strategically, when I asked him again, he did not deny Miriam's memory. "Yes, I asked about you," he said calmly. "I was interested. For 15 years, for as long as it took." He said it without irony. "You positioned yourself in my life," I said quietly. "I stayed connected to people who mattered to you," he corrected. "That's different. Why not approach me directly back then?" "You weren't ready," he replied. The certainty in his voice disturbed me, as if he had studied not only my movements but my timing. "I moved cities," I said. "You stopped writing then." He held my gaze. "I knew you would come back eventually." That assumption carried a weight I could not ignore. For the first time, the idea of chance felt impossible. Our meeting years later had not been coincidence, it had been patience. And patience, when combined with quiet positioning, begins to look like design. After Miriam confirmed what I already suspected, something inside me shifted from confusion to clarity. Not complete clarity, but enough. That night, I did not circle the conversation gently. I asked directly, "Did you plan this?" He did not pretend not to understand. "Prepared," he said. "For what?" "For the right time." His tone was calm, almost instructional, as if explaining a long-term investment strategy. "You kept in touch with my aunt deliberately," I said. "Yes. You moved back to the city when I did. I had other reasons too, but you knew I was here." "Yes." There was no hesitation, no embarrassment. "I knew if I stayed consistent," he continued, "you would eventually choose stability. You value stability." The way he said it unsettled me. Not because he was wrong, but because he had studied me long enough to know it. "You made yourself the safest option," I said. "I became the best option." "That's not the same thing." He leaned forward slightly. "I never forced you. You said yes." The sentence hung between us. Legally, factually, he was correct. I had said yes, but choice assumes equal information. "You didn't tell me the full story," I said, "because you would have misunderstood it. You decided that for me." I protected the outcome. Outcome. The word felt transactional. "You talk like this was a project," I said quietly. "It was a commitment." "To what? To me or to winning?" For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not shame, frustration. "I waited 15 years," he said, his voice still controlled but firmer now. "I never dated seriously. I never distracted myself. I built a life that would be worthy of you." The statement might have sounded romantic to someone else. To me, it sounded isolating. "Did you ever consider that I might not want to be waited for like that?" I asked. "You didn't object when I proposed. You didn't give me context." He exhaled slowly. "If I had told you everything at the beginning, you would have run." The honesty in that statement was chilling. "So you withheld it," I said. "I waited until you were secure with me." Secure. The word felt reversed now. I realized then that he did not see manipulation. He saw strategy, patience, discipline. He believed he had earned me, as if I were a long-term goal. "I narrowed the distance," he said quietly. "That's all." But narrowing distance without consent is still control. And for the first time, I understood the imbalance clearly. He had 15 years of certainty. I had months. And the more calmly he explained it, the more I felt the ground under my marriage shifting. I remember the night it fully hit me. I sat alone in our bedroom, the lights low, the hum of the city outside the window. Silence stretched around me, but it was not comforting. It pressed, heavy and uneven, like water filling a vessel that could not overflow. I thought of 15 years of my life, ordinary, private, mundane moments, and realized he had quietly documented them all. The cafe I visited weekly, the library steps where I waited out the rain, the lectures I dreaded. None of it had been unseen. None of it had been mine alone. I felt grief first. Not for him, not for anger, but grief for the choices I thought were mine. For the autonomy I believed I had in my life and in this marriage. How much of my path had been quietly guided by someone else's patient strategy. I walked through our small apartment, touching familiar objects, the couch, the framed photo of my parents, the teacups lined neatly in the cupboard, and suddenly they seemed foreign. Things I had chosen, yet chosen within a framework he had anticipated, subtly steered. I tried to remember when I first felt free in this marriage, and realized I could not. Even my laughter at dinner, my casual remarks to friends, my own daily habits had been within a perimeter he had quietly measured. Tears came slowly, quietly. Not explosive, not cathartic, just inevitable. The kind that accompanies realization rather than outburst. I felt smaller, not physically but psychologically. Unequal, reshaped. For hours I sat with this truth, letting it settle. 15 years of silent observation. 15 years of positioning. 15 years that had culminated in a marriage I had thought was my own choice, but now felt orchestrated. The word harmless echoed in my mind. Harmless, he had said. Admiration, patience, strategy. All words that now felt carefully selected to shield intent. I did not hate him. I did not even feel rage. Just an ache that stretched deep into my sense of self. Grief for the agency I had assumed, for the illusions I had trusted. For the idea that some moments in my life had been unobserved, uncalculated, and truly my own. For the first time, I felt afraid of how long someone could wait for a life not yet fully theirs. And in that quiet fear, I understood. Love built in silence without consent is not love. It is design. The next steps were deliberate, quiet, practical. I contacted a lawyer, not in anger, not in dramatics, but to understand my options. I documented the notebook, the dated entries, and Miriam's recollections. Every detail, every witness, every timestamp became a record. Not evidence to punish him publicly, but a shield for myself. When I finally handed him the separation papers, he did not shout. He did not panic. He took them calmly, as if he had anticipated this outcome all along. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly, just enough to betray the weight he had carried. "After all these years," he said softly, almost rhetorically. "Yes," I replied, quietly, firmly. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. He did not attempt to sway me. He simply nodded, a small acknowledgement of the inevitable. 15 years of patient design had ended in the quietest, most unremarkable of ways. Family members reacted in subdued confusion. Some were sympathetic. Some questioned my choice, saying I was ungrateful. But the documentation, the notebook, and witness statements left little room for debate. The narrative he had carefully curated, romantic, patient, devoted, shifted subtly in their eyes. He was no longer merely the patient admirer. He was a man whose devotion had crossed the line into control. I watched him pack a few belongings, his movements precise.